Okay.
Hi, this is Drew Trifidelli with Sweet Spot Real Estate, and this is our first episode. So welcome, and I'm going to introduce you to Bob Lepore. Bob is a senior mortgage loan officer with Fulton Bank. He's working the Central Jersey region, and his number is 732-277-2633. He's a residential mortgage loan officer?
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
All right, great. So how you doing today, Bob?
All right.
Good. So Bob and I have known each other, I think, for close to 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember when we first met, but you were doing a presentation.
I do remember.
Yeah.
How to sell your home, how to sell more homes faster and for more money, or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I think it was at the office for the Real Estate Commission.
Yep, it was at the real estate board in, I guess that's Lawrenceville. It might be Lawrenceville or Trenton.
Yeah, yeah. And I give you a little bit of a hard time, I think.
You might have. I don't really remember that part.
But you responded really well to it, and it impressed me, your response. So, Bob's one of the hardest working, most honest mortgage people that I've run into. Sometimes I give him some pretty tough clients, and he works really hard for them. I wish more of them appreciated him as much as I do, but thank you.
Well, my former boss one time said, if you're in this business for applause, you're in it for the wrong reason. So, the fact that you appreciate it, that means the world to me. And, whether the customer does or doesn't, so be it.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed about what happens to mortgage brokers or loan officers all the time is people think they can shop for rates before they have a contract. Right? And they unfortunately get lied to a lot by a lot of people about how great a rate they can get, and then closing day comes along and suddenly the rate's not what they thought it was going to be.
There's actually there's a technique, and it's called quote and float. If person doesn't have a house, doesn't have a closing date, has nothing, the rate is almost irrelevant. And I've tried to explain that to people, but they don't know. But yeah, you can quote them anything, and yes, it happens where you're quoting, and you're low, and then it comes time to lock, and it's, rates went up a little bit. This is where we are today. By that time,
you bought a car.
By that time, people are already invested in it. They've maybe submitted documentation, and they're like, fine, okay, let's do it. So I try not to do that. I try to be as realistic as I can. I try to explain to people where rates are, why they are where they are, because very often we're not in control of it. People today think, oh, well, it's the spring market. Interest rates will go down in the spring, or it's the winter. Interest rates are going to go up in the winter, and it's really far more global than that. It has to do a lot with the cost of oil. Inflation is a huge driver of interest rates. Every week, documentation or information gets published that affects interest rates. This Friday, Jerome Powell is going to speak from Jackson Hole, and what he says will drive where interest rates go. Most people don't realize that, don't recognize that. So there's a lot that goes into interest rate. What I try to tell people is, if you like what you see today, lock it and don't look back. Because it can become maddening trying to do the spreadsheets and
time the market.
Time the market, correct.
Yeah. Well, that's great. All right, so I've got a few questions for you today.
Okay.
And the first one is, why did you become a mortgage lender?
Interesting story. When I bought my first house, long before I ever considered this as a profession, I got my truth in lending statement from the bank. And I called the bank and said, oh, you clearly have made a mistake in calculating my payment. The interest rate, I think, was 9 1/4. This was 1978. And I calculated an interest-only payment. And when I called the bank, they said, well, it would be that payment, Mr. Lepore, except at the end of 30 years, you'll still owe us the full amount. You will not have paid down any principal. And I was like, oh, okay. And that sort of started me off as to, okay, maybe there's a whole lot more to this than meets the eye. And then somewhere in the early 80s, when interest rates were starting to drop down from double digits, that's when I started to consider this as a profession, and thought, hey, I can help a whole lot of people who have mortgages in the teens refinance or buy a home now in the 9.9 range, single digits. And that was my goal. My goal was really to help people restructure and get into the homes that they chose to.
Interesting. I bought my first home when interest rates, I think, were like 16% or something like that.
It's probably like 81.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere. Yeah. Right around there.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So that's great. And then the next question I have for you is, what's the most memorable experience you've had so far?
Oh boy. I guess a couple come to mind. Number one, taking a mortgage application in the basement of a bar. That was actually for the bar, the owner of the bar. He was working. I met him that evening, and we went down into the basement and did it on a couple of kegs of beer. Not that we drank the beer, but we used it as our table. The second was a woman or a buyer who had asked me if they could do the mortgage in the name of a deceased relative. And I was like, well, no, you can't. It's got to be a living person, of course, one who's actually earning money. But why would you want to do that? Oh, because he had better credit. So, unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. And then the last one was a borrower who took me aside and didn't want to let me know, or wanted me to not let their spouse know that they were actually paying alimony to an ex-spouse. So those are three kind of things. And I guess maybe the last one was doing a mortgage for a professional basketball player. Got a little bit of a eye-opening as to how they're paid and the amount of money that they're actually paid.
Yeah, that's interesting. The thing about spouses and stuff like that. Of course, I deal with some of those types of things as well. And the common one that I get when I have a house on the market is somebody will call me and try to figure out how much money they're getting or what kind of offers they're getting. And it's happened quite a few times where it happened to be the spouse or the ex-spouse trying to figure out how much money that their ex is getting for the sale of the house. And so, people get funny with us when we ask a lot of questions of them about, who are you, why are you asking, because we have to protect our client. And, some people are like, I'm just trying to buy the house. And, when in fact, they're really not.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is, what are some of the odd requests? Well, that kind of was in line with some of the odd requests that you've had, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So I think we covered that. All right, your favorite restaurant?
Here in Robbinsville, a place called Villa Barone. It's right on Route 130. We started going there. Actually, my wife was pregnant with my son, who's now 20, and we were looking to move to Central Jersey, to Mercer County specifically, and she stopped there for lunch. And she told me, hey, I stopped at this place for lunch. The food was really fresh. We really enjoyed it. And we started going there. The gentleman who was the head waiter at the time that we started going there, and we, sort of struck up a relationship with him, ultimately wound up buying the restaurant. And, we had a couple of little events there, and, it's one of our go-to places.
That's interesting. That happens to be the place where I had my first date with my now ex.
Ah, okay.
So, a little dubious honor there for me.
Wow.
What are your pet peeves?
Oh my goodness. You get this so frequently today. People who are completely unrealistic in what they want. I recently had a gentleman who told me that he wanted to buy a $450,000 house, and actually had to buy a $450,000 house because he needed 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths and all of this. And great, we start talking, and what do you do for a living? Well, he's an Uber driver. Okay, great. I mean, he's self-employed. I need to see your tax returns. The tax returns would have enabled him to buy a house of about $200,000. And when I went back to him and said, look, you're not going to be able to afford a house of $450,000. In fact, the payment is more than you are bringing home every month. He was outraged. He was outraged that he couldn't do this, wouldn't buy it, wouldn't be able to buy it. I also get very many people who ask me, well, why do you need that? That's private information. Why do you need information on assets, where I got my money, if we see large deposits? I kind of feel that they have a sense of entitlement. Hey, I can buy this, I want to buy this, even though maybe their credit is not the best, even though their earnings are not the best. They feel that they're entitled to buy it. That always makes me a little bit uncomfortable in trying to have that conversation with somebody. I recently had a customer tell me that a piece of documentation that I was asking for was irrelevant. And I had to explain to him, well, yeah, it's very relevant, and here's why it's relevant. And ultimately, he did not apply with me. He thought I was being too intrusive. We don't ask for documentation just for the sake of asking for it. The federal government regulates a lot of what we do, and we are required, actually, to provide certain levels of documentation. And if we see things that are red flags, we have to investigate them. One of those items are large deposits. We're obligated by Homeland Security to source large deposits, and people do find that very intrusive. We get a lot of people, especially during COVID, who took their money out of the bank and put it in the basement, and now are putting it back in, and they find that to be burdensome in us having to provide that level of documentation. So yeah, pet peeve is somebody who's either self-entitled or just not willing to understand that there is a process. And think about it. We're going to lend you $500,000. We're entitled to know if you have the ability to pay it back.
Yeah, sort of a spin-off on, from my point of view, I definitely want somebody like you checking out the buyers, because if I put a contract on a house and they end up not being able to buy it, I just wasted their time, I wasted my time, I wasted the seller's time.
Yeah.
And all that does is breed bad blood.
Have you seen? I've seen an increase in the number of properties back on the market.
I've seen a little bit of that, yeah.
And one of the reasons why you see, the buyer, couldn't get financing,
right,
that's because whoever is doing the vetting, the pre-approval process, if you will,
right,
they're not doing their job.
Right.
I've seen it. I know mortgage reps who haven't even run credit. They write a letter. Yeah. Well, it's just a pre-approval.
Right.
But like you said, you've got a buyer who fell in love with a house. You as a realtor have spent a whole bunch of money. You've got a seller who thinks, okay, I'm going to be selling my house. I'm moving on, and now all of a sudden everything collapses, and it's not good for anybody.
Yeah, not at all. All right. So I think that we kind of covered the greatest challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I think that fits right in there with that. What do you do for fun?
Well, for the most part, I have a 20-year-old son who has a race car, and working with him, the interesting part about that is he won't let me actually work on the car. My job is anything that needs to be lifted, pushed, pulled, or carried. That's what I do. And then, hey, Dad, we need to buy this. And I'm usually running to AutoZone with my credit card. But I have to say, I love it. I enjoy it. My daughters, when they were of that age, I was equally involved in their sports and what they did. It's kind of what I live for.
Does he drive or compete with the car? Or
yes,
he does.
It's actually a motorsport called drifting, and most people don't really know what it is. But it's not about going fast all the time. It's mostly about controlling the car and mimicking the moves of somebody who's driving next to you. If you've ever seen any of the Fast and Furious movies, they kind of do that stuff when they're doing car chases in the street and they're sliding the car around, and it's a whole subculture. And we go to the track, several times a year, and we know all the people there, and it becomes a community. And he now is part of a team, and it's a lot of fun.
Is it dirt track or?
It's on asphalt, but it's very much like dirt track racing when you see those cars going sideways in a circle. Yeah. These are on road courses, but they're doing all of that sliding except on asphalt. Our tire budget is enormous.
I was thinking they have to be pretty slippery tires.
Well, and you go through them quickly. They generate a lot of tire smoke, and so our local FedEx driver knows us well, because we buy the tires from a distributor and have them FedEx to us. So he knows us well, and at any given time we probably have 40 spent tires in the backyard.
Oh wow.
Yeah, my wife doesn't like it.
What do you do with them when you're done with them?
We call the DPW. They will take them 10 at a time.
All right.
So we call and we schedule 3 or 4 Fridays, and we put out 10 tires and they'll take them. They grind them up and use them for tot lots and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. What surprised you most when running your business?
What surprised me the most?
Yeah.
The degree to which the government is involved in the business. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac buy 80%, 70% of all the mortgages. And so they get to generate the rules. And some of the rules that they have generated are sometimes, we think that they're kind of counterintuitive or get in the way of good lending decisions. And sometimes they do. And you have to understand that when you have government officials usually overreacting to something, they will, quote, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So some of the guidelines and rules that they put in place make it more difficult to obtain a mortgage, and that surprised me a lot. The one thing, though, that I do tell people, and this is another thing that surprised me, for every obnoxious rule that we have, and we have a lot of obnoxious rules, there's a fraud that's been perpetrated somewhere by someone that caused that rule to be put into place. Even to this day, it's very surprising that people will try to obfuscate, will try to, I don't want to say commit fraud, but do things that that we might, in looking at it, consider fraudulent, and think that they can get away with it. You can't get away with it. The checks and balances are too great. Recently we had somebody who submitted a set of tax returns to us. Now, all mortgage lenders, we request from the IRS copies of the tax transcripts that you have submitted. And when we matched up what he submitted to what he gave to the IRS, two completely sets of documents. And I said to him, you know, did you think we weren't going to check? All lenders do this. They have to. We're required to do it. So you can't really commit fraud. And they've taken away a lot of the loans that kind of allowed that to happen. In the quote mortgage meltdown in 2008, 9, 10, they would give a mortgage at that time to almost anybody. They weren't checking anything. Today, we check everything. So yeah, it was a little surprising the degree to which the government is now involved and continuing to get involved, and it's becoming more political as political appointees head up some of these bureaus in Washington. They take a particular approach to things, and some administrations might require more regulation, some administrations require less administration, and their appointees follow that approach. So that's a little bit surprising that it's not more in the hand of the bank.
Yeah.
It's not more in the hand of somebody sitting in the bank who says, yeah, we know Drew. Right. Drew's good for the money. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
The days of a handshake are gone.
Yeah, small bank relationships or whatever. Not that many small banks left around.
Not that many. And thinking of one in particular, Roma Savings.
Right.
Roma Savings was very popular in this central Mercer County area. Generated out of Trenton, and then spread out to Hamilton, Robbinsville, and Roma Savings was one of those banks that did things on a handshake. It's been acquired now, I guess, a couple of different times. It went from Roma to Investors, and Investors now, I think, to Citizens. I'm not sure, but that's all changed.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good interview, huh?
Oh, I think so.
Covered a few things. I've got tons of more questions, but I don't want to take up your whole day. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Pleasure.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So again, Bob Lepore, Fulton Bank. Give them your number.
732-277-2633. Don't hesitate to call the cell phone. I answer it 90% of the time, much to the chagrin of my wife, but that's my business.
Great.
Thank you again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. I don't know if I got a little